I got follow up here. Since we were talking about acquaintances last time and friends and relationships,
yeah,
I wish I would have had this article from Fast Company because I think it's really good advice. Now, I'd like to append it a little bit, but I'd like to talk to you about this article. It's called The Science of Why We Talk Too Much and How to Shut Up.
Man, this is some advice I could certainly take.
Well, and let's talk about that. So the subtitle of this is, Our Brains Are Wired to Reward Us for Talking About Ourselves, but droning on about yourself is a horrible way to make a good impression. And I would just say it's a horrible way to make friends, to make meaningful relationships, to just drone on and on about ourselves.
Dude, can I tell you, and I'm guilty of doing this, but one of the things that I don't want to say makes me not want to be friends with someone, but it turns me off from the conversation or from an interaction is when I'm meeting someone for the first time and I'm telling them a story about whatever it may be, and then
your trip to Cancun.
Yeah, my trip to Cancun. And they're just trying to connect.
Yes.
They're not trying to do anything mean.
Right.
But it's they'll cut me off and then they'll tell me about their friend's trip to Cancun. And not let me finish my story. I don't know why, but this happens to me a lot. But I'm also guilty of doing that sometimes.
Right.
But just to this article's point of, yes, talking about yourself, especially interrupting someone while they're talking about themselves to talk about yourself.
Yeah.
Not a good way to make friends.
Yeah, and not a good way to make a first impression or a lasting. Well, you can make a first impression. It's not a good first impression, right?
Yeah.
So here's I'll read a bit of an excerpt, and then we can have a discussion around it. Ryan, you probably talk too much. And there is a good reason for that. Science says that humans, being social animals, are programmed to use communication as a vital tool to survive and thrive. This wouldn't be a problem, except for the fact that science also tells us that our favorite subject to discuss is ourselves. People spend 60% of their conversations talking about themselves, 80% when chatting on social media. There's a nice disparity there. Think about that.
Wow.
It's one of the reasons that I make sure that when I tend to write anything that has to do with advice, I'm writing usually in the plural third person. I'm writing about we. Here's our problem as consumers, or our problem as human beings, or whatever, as opposed to saying you, and blaming other people,
right?
Or saying me. Look how great I am, me. But here's our problem. Here's how we can fix it, right? And then of course I'll often tell it through my own lens, like here's the story I have, but only if it serves the greater good. It's easier for me to just blather on and maunder on endlessly about myself, but if it doesn't serve the greater good, then we're just maundering on, right? So 80% of the chatting on social media, the reason researchers found was that it just feels good. So much so that Harvard psychologists discovered that individuals were willing to give up money for the opportunity to disclose information about themselves.
Say that again?
You're willing to give up money just so you have the opportunity to disclose more information about yourselves. And there's a link.
So basically people are willing to pay to talk about themselves.
Yes. Exactly. And there's a link to a study that Harvard did here.
Well, I mean, think about social media.
Yeah.
They're gathering all that information on you. People know when they use Facebook, their privacy is being invaded. But that's the price they pay to be masturbatory.
Yes. I need to be able to have this digital soapbox from which I can spout my nonsense.
Yeah.
And I think we're all culpable to some extent.
Of course.
The question then is how can we rein it in, right?
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, this propensity to pontificate is at odds with our collectively dwindling attention spans, which has been measured between as many as 59 seconds to as few as 8 seconds. So our attention span these days is somewhere around 8 seconds.
It makes me sick, man, because I'm guilty of that, dude.
Absolutely.
It is a problem. Did you see Tim Cook the other day?
Tim Cook, Apple guy.
Yeah,
I hear they're announcing something about how we can stop being distracted with our cell phones.
His phones. Yeah, he was going on this. He just basically was talking about how he spends too much time on his phone, and it was just interesting to see the CEO of Apple say, "Hey, I'm on my phone too much." That means that there are a lot of other people who are probably on their phone too much,
right?
And this guy who sells phones. It's funny because I never really had an opinion about him, but it's kind of like, at Patagonia when they're like, you don't need this jacket.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a great marketing. Because it seems honest. I don't know if he's being, if he's doing it for the marketing or not.
Well, if you can market honestly too, right? I mean, the whole advertising essay I wrote a few months back was sort of about that. Like, there are ways to promote yourself honestly to try to help other people, and that can actually help you make money along the way. And so hopefully, my great hope here is, because Apple isn't Facebook or Google, where all of their attention, attention is their currency to a great extent. With Apple, it's more about the hardware than it is the software, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe they can manufacture the hardware in a way.
I think you just accidentally burned Apple.
What do you
it's
mean?
not so much about the software as much as it is the hardware.
Well, no, I mean, they recognize that the money they make is from selling hardware. Yeah. Google doesn't make money from selling hardware,
right?
And Facebook doesn't make money from selling hardware. I think both companies would like to, just like Apple would like to make money from selling software. But the software they sell is essentially free, right? It comes with their hardware, right? And so when I look at a company like Apple, maybe they can solve some problems, and they can make some money along the way doing so. And that problem with us right now is this 8-second attention span, right?
Yeah.
So let's see. Let's get back a few 8 seconds. Thanks to the barrage of information from both verbal and digital sources, the ideal conversation should be a total give and take, with each person speaking about 50% of the time. That means staying quiet half of the time. A tough but influential tool. That means staying quiet half of the time. A tough but influential tool for business. Oh, there's a link there to something called a tool for business. As Peter Brugman notes in the Harvard Business Review, silence is a greatly underestimated source of power. In silence, we can hear not only what is being said, but also what is not being said. In silence, it can be easier to reach the truth. I think ultimately there are some Zen koans there about silence being the ultimate truth or something like that. But sometimes we get really uncomfortable. And I get it, especially if we're on a podcast or something. You don't want, you can pause for dramatic effect. And there's some radio hosts who do that really well, where you turn on the radio and you're like, is this just dead air? And then all of a sudden you hear them talk right when you're getting ready to change the channel. They've mastered that dramatic pause. But on a podcast, sometimes I'm just looking for the next thing to fill. But the truth is, in our day-to-day conversations, the other 167 hours a week that we have, we should practice a lot more silence for listening, right?
Yeah.
And so, silence is definitely an underestimated source of power. To ensure that you're giving your conversation partner equal time and learning as much as you can, Mark Goulson, a business psychiatrist, says it's important to pay attention to the 3 stages of speaking to other people. And these were the tips I thought would help with the acquaintances / friends / just relationships in our lives. Number 1, the business stage. On task, relevant, and concise. So being... especially if you're wanting to interact with someone, stay on task, be relevant, and be concise. The succinct or concise. The old saying, brevity is the soul of wit. And that is true in writing when we're communicating. Seth Godin wrote something recently about throat clearing and how unnecessary it is.
I just saw that, yeah.
That's something I've been teaching in my writing class for years, the How to Write Better writing class. One of the worst things about blog posts is they could start 2 or 3 paragraphs later. There's all this throat clearing of, I'm really sorry that...
Prefacing and...
Yeah, I haven't written in 2 weeks. I'm really sorry about that. Yeah. And it's like, no, get to the point. But that's even more true in these conversations that we're having. Let me get to the point.
Every time I've seen blog posts or a newsletter or something come through and it starts off with an apology, never have I been like, I'm so glad they said I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm so glad they apologized for X, Y. I mean, speaking directly towards what you said about, I haven't posted in a couple weeks or I haven't posted in a while. They're in my inbox. I obviously want to read them.
Yeah.
So, I don't need an apology. But yeah, I totally agree.
And by the way, because I have so many other things going on, I probably didn't notice anyway. If anything, I'm glad you didn't post and you took your time to write something that was meaningful as opposed to just spamming me.
Yeah, thanks for not just putting content out there.
Yeah. Because that's offensive.
Right.
Just being a content generation machine. No one wants that in their inbox. If that happens, what? You're gonna unsubscribe, right?
Yeah.
If you just keep like getting spammed by someone, you're like, oh, this isn't adding value anyway. Now, here's the thing: like there are a lot of musicians I subscribe to in my inbox. And I like getting updates, even if I find out they're going on tour in Indiana and Ohio and Michigan. Like, it's cool for me to see, like, a little update from Andy Davis.
Yeah.
And oh, that's cool. He's doing something like that. So I don't mind something like that. That's not spammy or promo-y. It's overly promo-y. It just tells me what's going on in his sort of life touring. Now, if he were to send me reminders every day that he was going to Indianapolis, I'd be like, dude, what are you doing?
Right.
And so... there is that fine line. You want to be able to communicate without beating them over the head, and that goes back to this first point. Stay on task, relevant, and concise. Second point is the feel-good stage. So wonderful and tension-relieving for you, you don't even notice the other person is not listening. So this is kind of a problem, right? Where you or I or anyone, we just start like, I have to get this information out. I'm this bottle of carbonated information, and as soon as I pop the top, it just squirts everywhere. Yeah. It's that champagne celebration it's an explosion of information, and it feels good to you, but it's bad because they don't even notice the other person is not listening. I'm just spouting. Have you ever been talking and all of a sudden you notice, like, oh, they've got the dead stare.
Oh, dude! As soon as someone
they're not listening.
As soon as someone like breaks eye contact with me, and I could be in the middle of a story, if they break eye contact and they're looking at their phone, or they're looking off in the distance, they're looking at a girl walking by, like I just stop the story. And half the time they don't ask me to finish. Maybe the other half the time they'll be like, "Oh, could you finish that story?" And I will finish it. But 50% of the time I'm like, "Oh, I've lost your attention. And this story is pointless, isn't it?"
That's funny you say that. I'm trying to think. I think it was Raymond Carver, the short story writer, who said in order to find a good short story, what he'll do is like go talk to his friends. Like he'll go to like dinner with his friends or lunch with his friends and tell the first half of the story. Yeah. And then he'll just trail off of something else. And he knows the story's good if people come back and say, "Hey, back to that one story you were telling, though. Can you finish that?" And then awesome. he knows, like, yeah, I can finish it.
Like, yeah, I can finish that, and
now I can write about it.
This is interesting, not just with me, but with other people.
Exactly. So, just be, and then, so another tip from another writer, David Foster Wallace, he would tell his students that you're both simultaneously more interesting and less interesting than you think. And his biggest challenge as a teacher was trying to convince his students that they were more interesting, they had more interesting stuff to write about, and they were also less interesting. Your trip to the grocery store to shop for oranges probably isn't interesting, but there is something about that might be interesting. The way that I would reframe that is there's something about that might serve the greater good. There's some sort of lesson there. Yeah. In fact, you and I, when we were on tour in 2014, we wrote about a story about oranges, about there are bruises. We bought this bag of oranges that were sitting in the backseat of your Corolla. Yeah. And Sean, put a link to that in the show notes if you would. Podcast, Sean.
God, that seems so long ago.
It was 4 years ago, but it seems like a lifetime ago. Yeah. And it was called "There Will Be Bruises," but the story wasn't about shopping for oranges, right? Right. It was about the bruises that we were taking on tour.
Yeah, it was a metaphor. Yeah,
exactly. And so there's something interesting there, but it's probably not the thing that you find to be interesting, right? Yeah. And then the third stage of the conversation he lists here is the off-track attempt to recover stage. The off-track attempt to recover stage. Rather than re-engaging by listening, the usual impulse is to talk even more in an effort to regain their interest. And so see the aforementioned Harvard results. And so I think that's true. Like, where it's like, I know I find, especially with people who I find to be way more interesting than me, like, I think back to, we've done 2 podcasts now with Rob Bell. And the thing that I wish would have happened there is I would have heeded this advice, which I knew this advice, but I wish I would have heeded it more. I'd just shut up and listen more and allow more talking and ask the appropriate questions that are short enough that, like, just allow me to get out of the way, right? Instead of feeling the need to re-engage by talking more instead of listening, right? Goulston writes that he too was guilty of this, even after writing a book called Just Listen. That's when coach and NPR radio host Marty Nimco told him that he needed to start practicing what he preached. Holy moly! Like, you imagine being on NPR and they're like, "Hey,
practice what you preach."
You wrote a book called Just Listen.
You know
Maybe
what?
You need to just listen.
This is a great example of how none of us are perfect, man.
Right.
And like, there's not a perfect conversationalist. There's not a perfect minimalist. I think this whole journey for me, I don't know about you, Josh, but for me, it's not about being perfect. It's not about having like the perfect amount of stuff as much as building really good habits in my life, and being able to talk about how I can overcome these, for the lack of a better word, these sins that I am committing to have less and less sins. It makes me think about the more wins than losses. Right. It's not about just winning all the time as much as it is about writing a book about being a good conversationalist. And someone calling you out on it, you can say, yes, like, that's why I wrote the book, because I too struggle with this, and this is how I deal with it.
Exactly, yeah. But for me, my life is perfect because I do have the right number of things.
Right. What number is that?
They're perfectly organized. I can't tell you the number. You have to buy my book. I'm going to reveal it. The 10 steps to have the perfect amount of things.
I want to be you when I grow up.
Yeah, so let's see. Nimco offered the following traffic light strategy to rein in the chatter. You get a green light during the first 20 seconds. Your listener is liking you as long as your statement is relevant to the conversation and hopefully in service of the other person. So the first 20 seconds, sort of the intro, right? Mm-hmm. You get the green light, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you have 20 seconds to be really succinct. They call this an elevator pitch in some places, mm-hmm. right? So what can I do to present the most relevant thing? Sometimes I think that's just asking a question, because you can do that in way less than 20 seconds, and it opens up the floor for the other person, allows you to listen, and all of a sudden you seem like a great conversationalist when you ask a good quality question.
Absolutely.
The yellow light is the next 20 seconds. Now the risk is increasing that the other person is beginning to lose interest or think you're long-winded. So if you're beyond 20 seconds, they're okay. Unless you're really compelling. So going back to the Rob Bell example, you and I saw him do a 2-day event in Laguna Beach. Mm-hmm. He spoke for 9 hours a day for 2 days straight.
It was incredible.
And I was like, but he also knew when to take appropriate breaks. Like 2 hours in, he'd be like, all right, let's go take a break for tacos. Let's go take a break for surfing. And you're like, but wait, just finish the point. And then that was the whole point. Like, he kept you going there. Yeah. It was like a 18-hour green light, it felt like.